And there are countries like China who will be only too willing to provide funds that come with political strings attached, of course, because with Chinese money comes a demand to support Chinese political goals. So I do think this is a real strategic mistake.
Now, the freeze has thrown the future of the organisation and the programmes they run into uncertainty. But could it also be a geostrategic error? That's what Foreign Secretary David Lammy said today. The Americans' decision to slash international aid could open a void for China to fill and exert its global influence. Well, joining us now is Peter Ricketts, Lord Ricketts, crossbench peer, who served as ambassador to France and as the UK's first national security advisor. Lord Ricketts, welcome to the show. Thank you for giving us your time.
Good afternoon, Alexis.
What is your view, Lord Ricketts, on this? Is there a danger for China, for example, to step in and fill the void? What would that do?
Yes, I think there is, and I think David Lammy is right to say that. Let's first of all talk about what USAID has been doing. It's been doing funding programs for health, for child health, women maternity health, for fighting corruption, for encouraging the free press in authoritarian regimes. So all of those programs, valuable programs, sometimes life-saving programs, are at risk. And yes, it also then leaves a gap because countries that have depended on American aid will turn elsewhere for support. And there are countries like China who will be only too willing to provide funds that come with political strings attached, of course, because with Chinese money comes a demand to support Chinese political goals. So I do think this is a real strategic mistake.
When you listen to Donald Trump and Elon Musk talk about USAID, they also focus on money that's been sent for different purposes than the ones that you mentioned, purposes which they feel are not a good use of American taxpayers' money. Do you accept that there could also be wastage in that government department, and that's something that Donald Trump is entitled to look at?
I mean, it's a program that's worth tens of billions of dollars, and it seems fair enough that they should be reviewed, and that any programs which they think are not in line with their political objectives, not achieving anything, can be struck out. And bear in mind that we've also been through this in the UK, because I think David Lammy started his comments with reference to the previous Conservative government slashing the UK aid budget and combining our aid department DFID with the Foreign Office, which also led to eliminating a lot of, I think, very valuable programs. So the UK and the US have lost reputation in the world because for years we funded useful programs and then they've stopped dramatically. But of course, it would be reasonable for any US administration to check that the programs that are being in operation serve a useful purpose. And no doubt there are some that don't. But to stop all of them at once, suddenly like this, is bound to cause enormous hardship and risk and damage the West's reputation further.
Do you think it was a mistake for the previous government to reduce our foreign aid spending?
I do. They cut it from, I think it was 0.7% of GDP to 0.5, several $1 billion lopped off the aid program. They've also now charged quite a lot of the aid program to the cost of housing migrants in the UK. I mean, this is the poorest people in the world who are now suffering, and the risk, of course, to our countries of disease, which maybe spreads, of instability, of corruption, just grows if the UK and other Western countries are not helping to tackle these problems around the world and showing that we're not just simply trying to be out there, for our own purely selfish interests. We also have the sense of a more general good that we benefit if public health is improved, if countries fight climate change, if they fight corruption, and all of those things are good for countries like the UK and, by the way, the US.
Do you think that the argument for foreign aid in the UK, for USAID, has failed in a sense, has not been made properly? From what I understand, USAID was set up by President Kennedy. This idea that if you start putting money into countries abroad, then you're going to reduce conflict. You're going to even reduce immigration. If people are happy where they are because their governments and their countries are working, they're going to be less likely to want to immigrate to other countries. Do you think that argument now has been lost. Perhaps, as I see here on my text coming in as we're speaking, Lord Ricketts, because people have been incensed that USAID, for example, have been putting money into diversity programs across the world, that some people are saying, well, look, that's not their job and they shouldn't be wasting money there.
Well, people are entitled to their views. I mean, I think actually diversity programs that promote, for example, women in societies can be very valuable. So I don't think they failed. No, I think in terms of life expectancy, for example, child mortality rates down, disease rates down, some diseases practically eliminated. The fight against AID, for example, I think this has been carried by Western support, and it has been valuable. I agree with you that I don't think politicians have always been very effective in making the case for it. I think there is public willingness to help those in need abroad. If you think of the charity appeals we get when there's a disaster or a famine abroad, you get a lot of public support. I think people want to feel that they can help those who are going through some terrible disaster in their lives. And so I think the case can be made for our countries, which are wealthy countries, to do their part in trying to alleviate suffering and ill health and child mortality around the world. I'm not sure that it is always made very effectively, maybe less in the US than the UK, actually. I think many people were rather proud of DFID as a piece of UK soft power. Perhaps that job hasn't been done more recently in the US. In any case, I think to slash all the programs immediately, rather than simply put them on hold and review them, that must be a mistake.
Lord Ricketts, I want to tap into your previous life as a national security advisor. I want to get your thoughts on what we heard earlier on Times Radio. Lord Hannan, former Conservative MEP, spoke to Rod Liddell on Labour government's negotiations over the Chagos Islands. Here's what he had to say.
If we just look at the Chagos Islands, which is the most extreme example of this, here is something that has the potential to do huge damage to Starmer, not only because it's a catastrophic deal in itself, but because it confirms all the negatives that people were forming about his government. That they're bad at negotiating, that they're weak, that they're woke, that they care about every country except our own, that they're spendthrift with taxpayers' money. And the only argument on the other side of that balance is that we're complying supposedly with a non-binding advisory opinion by some court whose jurisdiction we only accepted on condition that it doesn't apply in disputes with other Commonwealth or ex-Commonwealth countries.
Do you think the government has got it wrong on the Chagos Islands?
Well, I find it rather odd to hear Lord Hannan, a Conservative, saying that, since the negotiation began under the previous Conservative government, under James Cleverly. It was pretty much concluded by the time of the election, and this government, as I understand it, have essentially just pushed it over the line into an agreement. So no, I don't agree with him. And it's not just some court, as he puts it, that is found against us. It's the International Court of Justice, the court that Britain was absolutely fundamental in setting up after the Second World War. And yes, it's an advisory opinion, but it's not comfortable for a country that claims to be a champion of the rule of law to be subject to a finding against them by the International Court of Justice. The deal that was first begun under the Conservatives and now completed under this government gives the UK 99-year lease of this strategic asset in a very important part of the world. And that seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable outcome. If the deal falls through, then continued uncertainty about the status of the Chagos Islands and this Diego Garcia base goes on. So I think there's an awful lot of reinventing history in the current Conservative reaction to the deal that's apparently on the table.
Lord Ricketts, thank you as ever for your time.
Thank you.
Lord Ricketts there, crossbench peer who served as ambassador to France and as the UK's first national security advisor.